There's a line in the Tao Te Ching that most translations flatten into something that sounds like a fortune cookie. Chapter 2, it goes, and this is the DC Lao version, which is probably the most faithful to the original structure. When the people of the world all know beauty as beauty, there arises the recognition of ugliness. When they all know the good as good, there arises the recognition of evil. That's the opening premise. It's not a comment on aesthetics. It's not an observation about human nature. It's an argument about language itself, about what happens the moment you name a thing. Lao Tzu is saying something stranger than most people realize. He's saying that beauty and ugliness don't exist independently. They come into being together. Name one, and you've already created its opposite. They're a package deal. And if that's true for beauty and ugliness, it's also true for happiness and unhappiness. The moment you decide you're searching for happiness, really decide, make it a goal, a project, something to achieve, you've simultaneously created a category called not happy yet, which is exactly where you now live. Let me back up slightly because Lao Tzu is not the obvious choice for this argument. He's the semi-mythical author of the Tao Te Ching, 81 short chapters, roughly 5,000 Chinese characters, probably compiled around the 4th century BCE. The name means something like the Book of the Way and its virtue, though virtue is a clumsy translation of tea, which is closer to the natural power a thing has when it's fully itself. A tree's te is its treeness. A river's te is the way it moves downhill without being told to. Here's an interesting side note. We don't really know if Lao Tzu was a single person. The name literally means old master, which could be an honorific. Some scholars think the text was assembled over generations. It doesn't matter for our purposes, the argument wherever it came from. What makes Lao Tzu different from, say, Seneca or Marcus Aurelius is that he's not interested in teaching you techniques. He's not giving you a morning routine. He's pointing at the structural problem with how you're thinking about the whole situation. Happiness, success, virtue, all of it. He's saying the framework is broken before you even start. So what exactly is the framework problem? Lao Tzu identifies 3 interlocking traps. The first is the trap of naming, which we've already touched on. The moment you define a goal as desirable, you've built a permanent sense of its absence. You can't want something without simultaneously experiencing not having it. The second trap is the pursuit itself. Chapter 16, attain complete emptiness, hold fast to stillness. The 10,000 things rise and fall while the self watches their return. They grow and flourish and then return to the source. Returning to the source is stillness, which is the way of nature. That word return is doing a lot of work. The Taoist model isn't about accumulation, adding happiness, adding achievements, adding meaning to a life that currently lacks them. It's about returning to something that's already there, something you've been moving away from by pursuing. The third trap, and this one is the hardest to sit with, is that the pursuit of happiness makes you less capable of recognizing what you already have, not because you're ungrateful, but because the mental category, things that count as happiness, has been defined by your culture, your social media feed, the particular aspirations of 2024. And most of those definitions don't actually map onto any experience you can have right now. Think about what this looks like in practice. Someone spends 3 years working toward a promotion. They get it. There are, I think, roughly 48 to 72 hours of genuine satisfaction before the mental category of success recalibrates to include the next level. The wanting resumes almost automatically. This is so well documented in psychology that it has a name, the hedonic treadmill. But Lao Tzu's diagnosis is more radical than the hedonic treadmill. He's not saying you adapt to good things. He's saying the whole project of categorizing experience into good and bad and then pursuing the good is what generates the dissatisfaction in the first place. Chapter 44, Fame or Integrity, which matters more, money or happiness, which is more precious. Success or failure, which is more destructive. He's not answering those questions. He's questioning whether they're real questions. The framing assumes fame, money, and success are genuine goods, things that, once obtained, would solve the problem. He doesn't think they are, not because they're shallow or trivial, but because they're named things. And named things come with their opposites pre-installed. You get the promotion, and you've also gotten a new way to fail. At this point, you might be thinking, fine, but what am I supposed to do with that? If naming things creates their opposite, and pursuing happiness creates unhappiness, and every goal I set builds its own failure mode, what's the alternative? Wanting nothing. This is the obvious objection, and Lao Tzu anticipated it. The answer is not wanting nothing, it's wanting without grasping. Chapter 8 describes this through water. The highest good is like water. Water gives life to the 10,000 things and does not strive. It flows in places men reject, and so is like the Tao. Water doesn't pursue anything. It doesn't have a destination. It's frustrated not to have reached yet. It moves according to its nature, which means it always finds its way. It ends up in the lowest places, the places no one fights over, and does its work there. That's the alternative Lao Tzu is pointing at, not the absence of engagement with the world, not indifference. Something more like acting without the layer of evaluation that's constantly measuring the gap between where you are and where you've decided you should be. Wu Wei is the term. It's usually translated as non-action or effortless action, but neither quite lands. It's probably closer to action that doesn't resist its own nature. The water doesn't try to be water, it just is. Here's where this gets uncomfortable for modern audiences specifically. We live in a culture that has essentially industrialized the pursuit of happiness. There are apps for it, there are quarterly goal review frameworks for it. People pay coaches to help them build a happiness practice, which, when you write it out, sounds a bit like paying someone to help you build a craving practice. Tao Te Ching was written for a society with its own obsessions, status, reputation, ritual correctness, political intrigue at the Jew court. Lao Tzu was pushing back against that context, not ours, but the structure of the problem is identical. You have a thing, call it baseline experience, the unoptimized flow of a day, and then you have a concept of what that day should contain to qualify as good. The gap between the two is where all the suffering lives, not in the experience itself. It's hard to say exactly what Lao Tzu would make of the modern self-help industry, but I'd guess he'd find it fascinating in a grim way. We've gotten very sophisticated at mapping the gap, better metrics for measuring how far we are from where we want to be. More granular systems for pursuing the thing that the act of pursuing is preventing us from having. Chapter 22. Yield and overcome. Bend and be straight. Empty and be full. It's the inversion again. The path to what you actually want runs through the opposite of what you'd think. So here's where this lands, and it's not where you might expect. Lao Tzu isn't telling you to stop caring about your life. He's not a nihilist. He's not saying effort is useless or that nothing matters. He's making a much more specific claim that happiness is not a thing you can approach from the outside as a goal. It's not out there. It's not something that accumulates. Chapter 80. A small country has few people. Though they have machines that can work 10 to 100 times faster than a man, they do not use them. They take death seriously and do not travel far. Though they have boats and carriages, no one uses them. They are content with their food, beautiful in their clothing, peaceful in their dwellings, and happy in their customs. That's the closing image of the Tao Te Ching, basically. A village that doesn't scale. People who've stopped measuring the gap between where they are and where they could be, not because they gave up, but because the question no longer makes sense to them. I think the uncomfortable part is that this doesn't resolve into a method. There's no technique at the end. The whole point is that technique is the problem. Tao Te Ching is a text that tries to think its way out of thinking, to use language to point at what language can't contain. You are looking for a solution. Maybe that's the wrong thing to look for.